Hey guys, tonight we're not diving into the mind of a philosopher or the rule of a mighty king. Instead, we're stepping into something far more treacherous and tangled: love in the Middle Ages. Yes, love. That fragile, fumbling human emotion we so often glamorize today with emojis, candlelit dinners, and awkward first texts. But imagine navigating romance in a world without apps, without privacy, and certainly without choice. Imagine your path to love blocked by plagues, priests, family obligations, and yes, livestock. In medieval Europe, love was not the open field of freedom we often dream it to be. It was more like a fenced pasture with barbed expectations and a lot of watching eyes. It was not about personal chemistry, mutual hobbies, or whether your jokes landed. It was about property, it was about lineage, and most importantly, it was about survival. Close your eyes and picture yourself in a damp, stone-walled village where the wind carries the scent of smoke and livestock, and the nearest idea of romance might be the baker's son awkwardly nodding at you during a feast day. You're not wondering whether he'll call you later. There are no phones. You're wondering if his family owns a goat. A healthy goat, mind you, not one with a limp or a reputation for stubbornness. Now imagine being told that this boy, this neighbor or stranger, is to be your future husband. Why? Because your family has arranged it. They struck a deal, perhaps for a piece of land, maybe a small herd, or just the assurance that you won't be a burden for much longer. Romantic, right? The truth is, in the medieval world, love as we know it wasn't the driving force behind marriage. It was an accessory at best, a risky indulgence at worst. Your parents, or your lord, or perhaps a religious figure made the decisions. You didn't swipe right, you were swiped. For nobles, marriages were political instruments. Children were often engaged before they could even walk steadily. Entire estates depended on who married whom. Your wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a signed treaty, sealed with handshakes, prayers, and sometimes uncomfortable silence between two near strangers standing at the altar. Peasants weren't exactly swimming in freedom either. Though they had a bit more room for personal choice, that room was more like a broom closet than a ballroom. If your father liked the way the neighbor's daughter carried water jugs, or if the family across the lane had a strong pig, negotiations could begin. Love. Real love. The kind that burns slowly in the chest or takes root in secret glances, was considered reckless. A liability. Falling for someone outside your social class, or worse, outside of your parents' approval, could ruin not just your future, but your family's stability. And yet, people dreamed. They composed clumsy poems on scraps of parchment. They exchanged fleeting glances in crowded markets. They whispered verses in the corners of chapels, hearts thudding with hope and fear. Sometimes, someone would dare to hope. Not for a politically advantageous match, but for affection, maybe even for passion, but mostly, people obeyed. They married who they were told to marry. They measured compatibility not in laughter or shared dreams, but in acres, coins, and livestock. Still, in those rare moments, when a girl dropped her spindle and a boy happened to catch it, or when fingers brushed during the passing of bread, there was a flicker, a fragile spark of something unsanctioned, something quietly, defiantly human. In a world built on structure and tradition, that spark was dangerous and beautiful. Let's say you're a young man in a medieval village, and your heart skips a beat when the girl down the lane walks by with a basket of onions on her head, balanced with the elegance of a queen. Or maybe you're a young woman who notices the way the thatcher works. Steady, sure-footed on the roof, with calloused hands and no fear of heights. There's a flutter, a warmth, an ache you can't quite explain. But before your thoughts wander too far, you remember, this isn't your decision to make. Not entirely. In your world, Affection is a luxury. Courtship isn't driven by charm or charisma. It begins with a question whispered not to your beloved, but to your parents. What can he offer? What does she bring? And the answers are not sentimental. They're practical. Tools, goats, blankets, dowries wrapped in linen and hope. If you're a man seeking a wife, you need more than good looks and a kind heart. You need land, tools, perhaps a few animals to your name. A leaky roof might be forgiven, but a man with no oxen and no means. He's not just unlucky, he's invisible. Love letters, no matter how beautifully written, are worth far less than a decent harvest or 2 healthy pigs. And if you're a young woman, your dowry is your currency. It might come in the form of silver coins, bolts of dyed fabric, or a clutch of fat geese. Your intellect might be dazzling. Your wit might sparkle brighter than polished armor. But if your family can't pay the price, you may never step inside a chapel in white. Now imagine, just for a moment, that you do fall in love. Really fall in love. With someone who makes your pulse race, whose voice you hear long after the words are gone. You meet their eyes at the market. They pass you a mug, cracked but precious. Maybe they brush your hand deliberately, gently. The sensation lingers. But love like this, it doesn't fit neatly into the medieval order. It's disruptive, illogical. Romantic love is for poets and bards, for characters in tragic tales and the verses of wandering minstrels, not for real people with mouths to feed and family debts to honor. And yet, you try. You might carve something small, a spoon from a piece of wood, rough around the edges, but heartfelt. Or you gather a few berries, just enough to fill a palm, just enough to say, "I thought of you." These gifts are tokens, quiet gestures of affection wrapped in plausible deniability. Because to say it aloud, to confess love out of turn, is dangerous. So you test the waters. You offer what you can. Maybe they smile, maybe they take the spoon and hold it for a beat too long, or maybe they turn away, eyes lowered, reminding you of the unspoken truth. Love is not yours to choose, especially not if you're a noble. Noblemen and women weren't just people, they were assets. Marriages among the elite weren't just personal unions. They were alliances, strategies, treaties in flesh and blood. A noble woman might be promised to a lord she's never met, her hand weighed against the value of adjoining estates or the reach of a family crest. A nobleman might be traded like coin, his future leveraged to repair debts or secure a border. To be born noble was to live with a crown on your heart, a heavy one, forged not of gold, but of duty. Love, in that realm, was often irrelevant. At best, it was a pleasant surprise. At worst, it was a liability to be extinguished. Even peasants, far removed from royal halls and velvet-lined chambers, married not for romance, but for utility. You might marry the girl whose family owned the adjacent wheat field, because irrigation rights mattered more than fluttering hearts. You might agree to wed the boy who could build a fence that wouldn't collapse in a storm. You dreamed of passion, yes, but you settled for proximity and shared labor. And still, somehow, people found ways to care. They snuck glances, exchanged gifts, folded bits of affection into the cracks of arranged unions. Love was not the foundation, it was the moss that grew along the stone. Because in this world, marriage was a calculation. But affection was rebellion. So let's say you're not a peasant ankle-deep in mud, or a noble suffocating beneath your family crest. Let's say you're a knight, polished armor gleaming, a sword at your hip, and a horse more obedient than most people. You've fought battles, you've taken oaths, and somewhere along the line, you've decided to surrender your heart. Not in marriage, but in performance. Because for knights, love wasn't about marriage. It was about spectacle. Welcome to the elaborate theater of courtly love. This was not dating. This was ritualized longing. A knight would choose a lady, often a noble woman who was inconveniently, and perhaps deliberately, already married, and vow to adore her from afar. Not touch her, not court her, just yearn, intensely, dramatically, publicly. You, the gallant knight, might write verses about her smile, comparing it to moonlight reflected on a still lake. Or her laugh, which you insist is like the ringing of silver bells, though you've only heard it once and you might have been concussed at the time. You wear her colors in a tournament. You compose poems so tortured they could be used as siege weapons, and if another man so much as glances at her with too much enthusiasm, you challenge him to a duel. The lady, meanwhile, plays her role with equal dedication. She is poised, distant, and colder than mountain snow. She might send a token, a ribbon, a handkerchief, a brooch, but mostly she remains mysterious, untouchable. Her power lies in being just out of reach, a symbol rather than a participant. That is the point. This love is not supposed to be consummated. It is supposed to ache, to burn, to inspire. You are not pursuing a wife. You are perfecting your suffering. You're not building a relationship. You're building a legend. Occasionally, you might share a glance across a hall or brush fingertips at a feast while reaching for the same goblet. These moments are electric, not because of what they promise, but because of what they can never become. The longing is the fuel. The impossibility is the art. To everyone involved, it's an open secret. No one believes this is pure, but everyone agrees to pretend. It's a dance of decorum. One misstep and you're not a knight in love, you're an adulterer. Or worse, a scandal. And yet, this peculiar tradition served a purpose. It gave the nobility a way to express emotion in a world where feelings were liabilities. It allowed them to pour intensity into safe channels, into poetry, music, symbolism. It turned unfulfilled desire into a badge of nobility. Did anyone really enjoy it? Hard to say. But the verses survived, copied by scribes who blinked in candlelight and probably rolled their eyes at every overused metaphor. The legends survived too, passed from minstrel to minstrel until they became timeless echoes of yearning. So the night pines. The lady smiles faintly, and somewhere, beneath layers of ritual and silk and sighs, a small piece of truth flickers. Love, even one wrapped in fiction, still finds a way to leave its mark. Imagine you're a young man in armor, hopelessly enamored with a lady whose name you can barely speak aloud. You've written verses, but they're intercepted by her confessor. You've gazed across feast halls and jousted in her honor, but still you cannot approach her directly. Every glance is observed. Every word is weighed. So you turn to tokens. Tokens were the lifeblood of medieval affection. Not letters, too risky. Not words, too public. Instead, you send her your glove, or a fragment of your embroidered sleeve, the thread still warm from your wrist. In today's world, it might feel absurd, sending part of your outfit to someone you're in love with. But in your world, it's a message. It's everything. The lady receives this offering and must decode it. Is it a profession of love? A plea for favor? A veiled invitation? She cannot ask. She cannot answer. She must choose how to respond. Perhaps she tucks the glove into her bodice, a secret no one else will notice. Or maybe she gives it to her handmaid, letting it vanish into silence. But maybe, just maybe, she sends something in return. A ribbon, lightly perfumed, a silver pin, a small carved charm. And now it's your turn to guess. Was it affection or obligation? Did she mean to encourage, or is she gently pushing you away? This is the medieval version of flirting, filtered through layers of meaning, distance, and plausible deniability. You could pin that glove to your chest at the next tournament and hope she notices. You could tie her ribbon to your sword hilt and pray no one assumes you're claiming more than was offered. And for the common folk, tokens were no less meaningful, just simpler. a wood carving, a stitched handkerchief, a small pouch of dried herbs. These were not decorative, they were declarations. To give someone a spoon you whittled by firelight was to place your heart in their hands, quietly and without fanfare. But tokens were dangerous too. Give one to the wrong person, and you invite gossip that can ruin reputations. Accept one too openly, and you may find yourself spoken for before you even understand your own feelings. Refuse one harshly, and you risk insult, and insult, in this world, has consequences. So everything is cautious, everything is calculated, and yet somehow every token feels deeply sincere, because in a world where emotions are rarely spoken aloud, where privacy is a myth and courtship is tightly controlled, even the smallest gift becomes a thunderous act. You walk through your days with that ribbon tied discreetly beneath your tunic. You carve a flower from bone and leave it by her door, unsigned. You carry a handkerchief stitched with her family's colors and pretend it's coincidence. And still, you wonder, does she know? Does she feel what you feel? You dare not ask. But your heart does. You finally mustered the courage to approach the one who's been haunting your thoughts. Maybe to offer a flower. Maybe to recite a few clumsy lines of poetry borrowed from a traveling bard. You're ready to risk vulnerability, to stand there with your heart cracking through your ribs. But before you even open your mouth, you feel it. Eyes, not theirs, everyone else's. Because in the medieval world, love is never private. It is observed. It is monitored. It is surrounded by a rotating cast of guardians, mothers, priests, cousins, and neighbors, all armed with suspicion and an impeccable sense of timing. If you're a young woman of marriageable age, you're rarely alone. Even a walk to the well is accompanied by Margaret and her hawk-eyed aunt, who clutches her rosary like a dagger and can detect flirting at 20 paces. If you so much as glance at the blacksmith's apprentice, she clears her throat in a tone that suggests eternal damnation. If you're a young man trying to court someone, the stakes are no lower. You knock on her family's door with a bouquet of wildflowers, only to be greeted by her father, sharpening something on a whetstone. Her mother, meanwhile, watches from behind a curtain, pretending to stir a pot that hasn't boiled in 3 hours. And just outside, the parish priest happens to be strolling past, for the 5th time that day. It's not paranoia, it's protocol. Because beneath all the romance and symbolism, the society you live in is deeply invested in controlling how and with whom love happens. Virtue must be protected. Family honor must remain spotless. Unsupervised affection is not just frowned upon, it's forbidden. Chaperones aren't just for nobles. Even peasants observe these customs, with group outings meticulously arranged and casual conversations occurring only within earshot of someone with gray hair and zero tolerance for nonsense. Sitting beside each other? Fine, but only if there's space for a grandmother to sit between you, knitting furiously and pretending not to listen while she hears everything. And then there's the church. The church has opinions. Many of them. Courtship, it says, must be pure. Love letters are suspect. Physical closeness is temptation. Entire sermons are dedicated to the dangers of flirtation. Yes, actual sermons, transcribed by monks in the scriptorium with all the enthusiasm of people who have never been kissed. Some monasteries even go so far as to open letters suspected of harboring romantic content. Your sweet little poem. Censored by candlelight. This is not love as a private adventure. It is love as a heavily regulated public activity, conducted under the watchful eye of God, family, and every villager with functioning eyesight. So if you're in love, truly in love, prepare to experience it the way one might listen to a song through a wall, muffled, frustrating, and just out of reach. You whisper feelings when no one is near. You linger too long near doorways. You become fluent in silence. And somehow, all this surveillance doesn't kill romance. It sharpens it. It forces lovers to become poets, strategists, liars, and dreamers. It makes every touch, every glance, every moment stolen in the shadows feel monumental. Because in a world that refuses to make room for love, the smallest acts of affection become revolutionary. So, you're in love. Or something like it. Maybe you've locked eyes across a feast. Maybe your hands brushed when you reached for the same ladle at the communal stew pot. You're not sure what it is, only that it tightens your chest when they walk past and loosens your grip on everything else. But there's no privacy. There's always someone there, someone to watch, to judge, to whisper. So you turn to the only refuge you have, the written word. A letter. In your hands. It's just parchment and ink. But in your heart, it's something else entirely. It's your voice, finally unshackled. It's the breath you've been holding, the confession you've rehearsed 100 times but could never say aloud. This letter, this fragile, folded hope, is everything. But it must be disguised. You can't simply write, "I love you." That would be far too dangerous. Instead, you reach for metaphor, for poetry, for language thick with longing and so cryptic it borders on absurd. You don't write, "I miss you." You write, "My soul is a stag, pierced by the arrow of your grace, wandering the forest of yearning." Because if anyone intercepts it, it has to sound just vague enough to be spiritual. And many will intercept it. To deliver your letter, you need help. You might bribe a servant or trust a sibling too young to understand consequences. Sometimes you pass it through a bard who sings your message aloud in the town square, pretending it's just a story. Everyone listens. No one names names. But you both know it's for you. Of course, there's always risk. Letters can be opened. Words can be twisted. One nobleman, they say, once wrapped his love letter around a pickled fish by accident, thinking it was kitchen parchment. It ended up in the wrong hands. The couple married anyway. Out of embarrassment, mostly. But you don't think of that. You write. And when you're finished, you press your trembling fingers to the parchment as if it might feel your heartbeat. You tuck in a pressed flower or dust it with something sweet, and then you let it go. Unsure if it will reach them, unsure what it will cost you, because make no mistake, this letter is not harmless. In a world where marriages are arranged and romance is regulated, a love letter is rebellion, a tiny insurrection written in ink. If you're caught, you could be shamed, punished, or worse. Forced to explain your feelings to a priest who still believes passion is a sin. But some do write. Some letters survive. They're tucked into hymnals and hidden in hymns. They're smuggled between loaves of bread and stitched into linings. They say what couldn't be said. They carry desire in the only way allowed, quietly, dangerously, beautifully. So you write, you risk it, because even in a world full of eyes and rules and chaperones, there must be some space left for longing. And if there isn't, you make it. At last, there's a break in the relentless grind of work, prayer, and duty. The fields have been harvested, the days are shorter, and the air smells like wood smoke and cider. It's festival time, and for a brief shimmering moment, the rules loosen. The maypole is raised, the drums begin, and for the first time in months, maybe years, you're allowed to look. Really look, not a stolen glance at the well or a fleeting gaze across the chapel. Now, in the raucous confusion of celebration, with laughter in the air and music echoing across the village, you are permitted to flirt. Carefully, quietly, strategically. Because festivals were one of the few times when unmarried men and women could mix without immediate suspicion. The bonfires provided cover. The games offered excuses. The music, chaotic and joyful, filled the space between words with possibility. If you're a peasant, you might try to impress someone by entering the sack race or chasing a greased pig through the mud. It's messy. It's ridiculous. And yet, if you make them laugh, if you fall off the hay bale with a grin instead of a groan, maybe, just maybe, you've opened a door. You've got nothing to offer but your effort, your spirit, and perhaps your best turnip. So you offer them all. Dancing is your best chance for contact. Every step is choreographed, every spin calculated, but within the rhythm, there is freedom. A hand lingers a second too long, a shoulder brushes against another in the crowd. It's all accidental, until it's not. The maypole dance is especially telling. It's a swirling storm of ribbons, partners changing in a blur. No one can say who danced with whom, not exactly. But everyone remembers who smiled, who flushed, who lingered. And if you're noble, the flirting is just as charged, but clothed in finer fabric. You recite spontaneous poetry, compare your lady's eyes to candles, stars, or precious stones. You present her with a brooch that definitely wasn't made by your servant 10 minutes ago. You might share a honey cake, and if she eats it without handing it to her dog, that's a good sign. Food is a language. A meat pie offered is not just nourishment, it's a dare. A hand-rolled biscuit is a proposal in pastry, but still, you're being watched, always. A bard with a big mouth is already crafting songs about who danced too close. A priest is somewhere near, frowning with holy disapproval. A parent, somewhere in the crowd, is pretending not to see you touch hands, but remembering it for future outrage. Because no matter how light the music or how bright the fires, the consequences are real. One smile too many, one moment too bold, and your flirtation becomes a scandal. Your innocent gift becomes an accusation, and you'll spend the next 6 weeks being judged from the pulpit and shunned at the market. Still, for these hours, these few hours, you're allowed to pretend. Pretend that love isn't a ledger, that your heart is yours to give, that someone might love you not for your cows or your father's land, but for the way you laugh, or the way you dance, or the quiet way you hand them a cup of warm cider. It isn't freedom, but it's close enough to taste. Forget castles and tournaments for a moment. You're not a knight. You're not a noble. You don't wear silk, and you don't compose verses in the moonlight. You wake with the cows, work with your hands, and fall asleep to the sound of chickens scratching under your window. You're a peasant, and for you, love isn't a storybook. It's a task, a shared burden, a flicker of comfort in a cold, drafty life. You're not seeking a soulmate who finishes your thoughts. You're looking for someone who can gut a fish, gather firewood, and get through winter without constant complaining. Compatibility isn't built on dreams, it's built on resilience. Romance, in your world, is quiet and practical. You notice someone not because they dazzle, but because they're steady. They carry water without spilling it. They've got a decent set of teeth. They don't borrow tools and forget to return them. They laugh sometimes. That's enough to catch your eye. So how do you court them? You don't write poems. You don't sing beneath windows. You give what you have. A bundle of firewood, a few fresh eggs, a turnip so perfect it might as well be a jewel. Maybe, if you're feeling bold, you whittle a spoon from scrap wood, a little crooked, but smoothed by hours of silent labor beside the hearth. It's not grand, but it's real. Nothing says I see you like a spoon carved by candlelight while your pig stares at you in judgment. Conversation happens not in secret gardens or during moonlit strolls, but while working, side by side in the fields, walking to the mill or mending a roof. You talk about crop yields, the weather. Whether or not old Thomas fell into the well again. You share space, and slowly, you share trust. There's no fanfare, no feasts, just a gradual understanding. I can count on you, and maybe you can count on me. If both families agree, and most of the time, they must, marriage follows quickly. There's no long engagement, no extensive planning. You move into a shared hut, or you build a new one from scratch, gathering stone, thatch, and goodwill from the village. You bring your best blanket, they bring their best goat. Together, you begin the great experiment of enduring one more winter. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. It's built on chores, routine, and the soft comfort of having someone next to you when the wind howls at the door. And over time, affection blooms. Not all at once, not in dramatic declarations, but in small things. A hand offered after a long day, bread saved from your own plate, the way they cover your shoulders when you fall asleep too close to the fire. This is love, too. Not the kind scribbled by court poets, but the kind whispered between tasks. Love built on the daily act of showing up, of staying, of sharing silence as easily as speech. In your world, that's all that matters. You've done it. You found someone who doesn't flinch at your muddy boots. They can cook, they can work, and maybe they even smile at your terrible jokes. In any other world, this might be the moment for fireworks or vows whispered beneath stars. But in the Middle Ages, this is when the paperwork begins. Because marriage, no matter how modest or grand, is not a dream. It is a contract. If you're a peasant, that contract is spoken, sometimes in the church, sometimes in the field, with a few witnesses and a blessing from a local priest who stumbles through the Latin. But behind the simple ceremony lies a checklist. How much land comes with the union? What about the cow? What happens if one of you dies mid-harvest? Who inherits the goat? Romantic, isn't it? And if you're noble, prepare yourself. You're not entering a marriage, you're entering negotiations. Your parents are involved. Their parents. Possibly a priest, a scribe, a cousin who once studied canon law, and a lord who just wants his tax revenue sorted. The bride and groom. Decorative. Expected to stand still and nod politely while their futures are shuffled around like chess pieces. You might not even have met each other before. That doesn't matter. What matters is what you represent. Her dowry balances your estate's debts. Your land extends her father's influence. Your coats of arms look nice together on a banner. Love is optional, the merger is not. And once you're married, it's permanent. Divorce, in the way we understand it, doesn't exist. The church permits annulments, yes, but only under very specific conditions. One of you was underage, or unbaptized, or accidentally married your cousin's cousin, or, most awkwardly, never consummated the union, which someone might have to swear to in writing under oath. Otherwise, you're in this for life. Through sickness, through poverty, through plagues and family feuds. There is no exit strategy, only survival. Still, not all is bleak. Sometimes people grow fond of each other. Shared chores become rhythms. Children arrive, and with them, a strange bond of exhaustion and loyalty. Winters survive together, build a kind of trust that no poem can capture. Tolerance in the Middle Ages is often just another name for love, and throughout it all, the Church watches. Marriage is not just a civil contract, it is a sacrament, a holy ritual. One of the 7 sacred steps on the ladder to salvation. You are not just marrying for legal reasons. You are marrying for God, with the saints as your witnesses and the angels silently taking notes. So you stand before the altar, with your spouse, your family, your dowry, your doubts, and your dreams. Someone hands over a sack of onions and calls it a blessing, and you smile. Because even if it began as a transaction, perhaps over time, it can become something more. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that you are not content with duty. You are noble. You have land in your name, a title on your signature, and a future already mapped out like a military campaign. You are betrothed, promised, packaged, and practically delivered. Your family has spent years negotiating your marriage. It secures borders. It settles debts. It is the final piece in a long and careful game. But you, foolishly, beautifully, have fallen in love. Not with the baron's son, not with the duke's daughter, but with someone wildly inappropriate, a squire, a merchant's apprentice, a woman whose hands are rough from work, or a man whose name holds no weight, and suddenly, everything you've been told about love, that it must come second to legacy, that affection is fragile, that loyalty belongs to blood, feels like a lie. You meet in secret, stables, kitchens, garden paths by moonlight. You whisper nothings that mean everything. You make plans, you count coins, and then one day, before your name is signed in ink and your heart locked in a marriage of strategy, you run. It's not just escape, it's defiance. A declaration shouted without words, I choose love. You might vanish to a monastery, call in a favor from an abbot who owes your family something, and whisper your vows before God. 2 chickens and a monk who's too nervous to ask questions. You might flee across a river, find a priest in a far-flung chapel, and bind your lives together before the ink on your betrothal dries. And back home? Chaos. Your father threatens siege over supper. Your mother weeps into her embroidery. Your siblings avoid eye contact. The church gasps. The gossip is endless. The scandal becomes legend. Because noble elopements were not just romantic scandals. They were political crises. You weren't just rejecting a marriage. You were rejecting a treaty, an alliance, a vision of your family's future. You were, in effect, declaring war. And for your beloved, the risks are higher still. If you're the groom in this story, the unsuitable one, the consequences may be brutal, maybe exile, maybe prison, maybe worse. If you're lucky, the families eventually give up, deciding that further outrage is more embarrassing than acceptance. They sigh, hold a feast, and pretend it was always the plan. If not, well, history has stories that don't end with blessings. Still, some of these forbidden marriages endured. Some became songs, whispered across generations. 2 hearts that chose each other, not because they were allowed to, but because they couldn't do otherwise. Because sometimes love makes fools of us all, and sometimes the fools are the only ones who get remembered. Let's say you're a bride. It's your wedding day, but you're not just walking down an aisle. You're being delivered. Not to a man exactly, but to a household, a lineage, a future prearranged and purchased. You don't carry just flowers. You carry a dowry, stitched into your name, clinking behind every step. Your dowry is your family's final word in the marriage bargain. It might be coins, sacks of grain, bolts of cloth, a prized heifer, or even a few pewter dishes that have only been dented once or twice. These aren't tokens. They're serious contributions, symbolic and strategic. The wealth you bring determines not just your marriage, but your worth. And your husband. He receives it all with a smile, a nod, and the mental equivalent of an abacus ticking away behind his eyes. He isn't just marrying a woman. He's acquiring an investment, and if the dowry is generous, so is his gratitude. If not toward you, then toward your father. Now flip the scene. In some places, the groom pays a bride price, an amount given to your family for the honor of marrying you. Here, your family is compensated for your absence, your labor, your presence, your ability to bear children, to milk goats, to tend hearths. It's not romantic, it's reimbursement. Either way, someone is paying someone. There is no marriage without accounting. And it's not just about goods. A generous dowry speaks volumes. It says your family is prosperous, well-connected, honorable. A small one might suggest they're desperate, or worse, trying to offload a daughter who talks too much or can't bake a loaf of bread without setting fire to something. But don't assume this wealth belongs to you. Once married, your dowry often becomes part of the household economy. Your husband manages it. The law protects it, technically. But protection is a generous word in a world where dice games and bad harvests can erase fortunes overnight. If your husband dies or disappears into a monastery mid-crisis, you might get the dowry back, eventually, with paperwork, with luck, with male relatives who are literate and motivated. Often, what's gone is gone. And the bride price, that's even trickier. Once paid, it's rarely returned. Like buying a rare animal, it's a final sale. Behind the ceremony, the smiles, the blessing of a priest and the celebratory onions, there is a ledger, a record of wealth exchanged, a quiet acknowledgement that love may be present, but profit is guaranteed. And yet, people do fall in love, even after all this, even after the cows are counted and the linens measured. But before that love can grow, someone must pay. You didn't marry. Maybe your family couldn't afford the dowry. Maybe you were the second son, with no land and no expectations. Or maybe, just maybe, you felt the call of something higher. You joined a monastery or a convent. You took the vow, poverty, chastity, obedience. You gave your heart to God, and in doing so, swore to give it to no one else. And yet, even here, in the quiet stone halls of devotion, the human heart refuses to obey. It might start small. A glance held too long across the refectory. A whispered joke during evening prayers. A moment when Brother Anselm's hand brushes yours as you pass the bread. Or Sister Beatrice laughs. Just once. And something inside you shifts. You tell yourself it's nothing, but your hands tremble during Vespers. Your prayers become cluttered with distractions. You avoid eye contact and then crave it. You think, perhaps, that what you feel is spiritual, that this ache in your chest is just holy admiration. But soon, you're tucking extra food into her satchel. You're lingering in doorways. You're writing letters, coded, layered, disguised as theological reflection. Your soul is a lamp in my night of contemplation, you write. It sounds sacred, but it isn't. This is love, and it is forbidden. Monasteries and convents had strict rules, of course. Separation, silence, surveillance. But even the thickest walls cannot keep out the whisper of longing. Some broke their vows. Some met in herb gardens under moonlight, disguising their footsteps, their breathing, their trembling hands. There were scandals, pregnancies, confessions, punishments, lovers sent away to distant abbeys in the mountains, never to speak again. Some were cast out, stripped of robes, forced to beg for mercy in the very streets they once renounced. Others were forgiven after sufficient penance and humiliation. And yet, not all stories ended in disgrace. Some left together. They took off their habits, cast aside their sacred names, and chose a life on the margins, married in hiding, sometimes welcomed by small villages that had long since stopped judging. Most, though, simply endured, returned to their cells, prayed harder, silenced their hearts, or convinced themselves that what they felt had never been love, just misguided zeal. But those moments, those quiet, unrecorded rebellions, they mattered.
Because they remind us that even in the most rigid of places, desire breathes. Even among the vows and the candles and the copied scripture, someone might look up and see something more than a fellow servant of God. They might see a soul, a smile, a reason, and for just a moment that reason is worth everything. You did everything right. There was a priest. There was a ceremony. Someone spilled mead on your mother's cloak, but it didn't ruin the day. You exchanged vows, maybe even smiled. You walked into marriage with hope, or at least with willingness. But now something's off. Maybe your spouse snores like a thunderstorm trapped in a barn. Maybe they gamble. Maybe they never mentioned the goat infestation in their family shed until it was too late. Or maybe, and this is more common than anyone admits, you just don't feel anything at all. Welcome to the quiet world of medieval marital disappointment. Because here's the truth. Once married, there is no easy exit. No divorce papers. No court of love to hear your complaints. Marriage is sacred, bound not just by law but by the divine. You're not just disappointing each other, you're disappointing heaven. You can try for an annulment, but the requirements are steep. Maybe one of you was underage, or already married, or secretly related, something that happened far more often than it should have. Or in the most delicate cases, maybe the marriage was never consummated, which meant someone had to confirm that, in writing, possibly under oath. Good luck with that, especially if you're noble. Your marriage isn't just personal, it's political. Trying to end it could unravel alliances, start family feuds, or plunge entire regions into awkward silence. Better, they say, to stay married and stay silent. So what do? You endure. You sleep in separate beds. You attend separate feasts. You sigh heavily during dinner and find yourself weeping quietly into your embroidery. You write passive-aggressive psalms. You pour your affection into the dog. Affairs happen, of course, quietly, carefully, sometimes spectacularly. Nobles find lovers among servants. Peasants fall for neighbors who just happen to be helpful with firewood. The church condemns it, of course, but human nature is rarely swayed by sermons. And if you're a woman trapped in a miserable union, your options are worse. Even if your husband vanishes or turns cruel, you are expected to remain loyal, pious, dignified, living off crusts and memories while the world turns without you. Still, not every marriage crumbles. Some grow into partnership, not the romantic kind but the sturdy kind. You raise children together. You harvest turnips. You argue over sheep, then share bread. Affection may not burn, but it settles in like embers. Tolerance becomes tenderness, not a grand passion but something quieter, enduring. Because in a world where there is no exit, you learn to build a life with what you have. And sometimes, against all odds, love still takes root. Death was everywhere in the Middle Ages. Plague, war, accidents. A misstep on a ladder, a poorly aimed cartwheel, a goose in the dark. And when your spouse dies, however it happens, you are left not just with sorrow but with something rare: choice. Because being widowed in the medieval world, especially as a woman, could be oddly freeing. As a maiden, you were watched. As a wife, you were controlled. But as a widow, especially one with property, you were suddenly visible in a new way. Independent, capable, sometimes even powerful, you could manage land, make decisions, speak in court, hire help. And while society still expected modesty, mourning, and the appropriate amount of sighing, you weren't under the same thumb anymore. You could run your household without a man at the head of the table, and no one could quite stop you. Of course, you weren't alone for long. Suitors appeared, fast, some with honest intentions, others very, very enthusiastic about your dairy cows. If you were youngish, with working hands and working teeth, you were a prize. Your experience, your household skills, your potential inheritance, they all made you very appealing. And if you were a man whose wife had passed, the pressure to remarry was even greater. Who else was going to cook, raise the children, patch your socks? Society expected you to find another wife quickly, preferably one who could tolerate the 11 children you forgot to mention in your proposal. So you look again, maybe toward the baker's daughter, now older and wiser, or the quiet widow who brings excellent jam to market and rarely gossips. This time, you're not choosing for land or lineage. You're choosing for peace, for understanding, for survival. Second marriages were different, quieter, warmer, less about alliances and more about compatibility. You've seen loss, you've weathered disappointment. You don't want perfection. You want someone who shares your memories, who can finish your sentence or sharpen your knife. But it's never entirely simple. The church frowns on remarrying too quickly, as if love should be paused until the grave cools. Family members squabble over dowries and land. A brother-in-law might demand the butter churn. A niece might accuse you of marrying for the pigs. And yet, remarriage was common, necessary, expected. Because life was short and winter was long. No one wanted to spend it alone if they didn't have to. And so you start again. You light the hearth. You share a simple meal. You speak of old grief and new beginnings. not because love is easy, but because it is still possible. Even after loss, even after years. Let's say you've fallen in love, genuinely, madly, irrationally. Your heart races, your hands sweat, your mind builds castles of longing. But before you say anything, before you dare to speak or even write, you must ask a different question. Are the stars on your side? Because in the Middle Ages, love wasn't just a matter of choice or permission. It was a matter of destiny, of fate, of signs read in the heavens and omens whispered by wind and bone. You might consult an astrologer, often a monk with a collection of ancient charts and questionable eyesight. Are your zodiac signs compatible? Was your beloved born under a lucky moon? Is Venus watching with favor or turning her back in disgust? If the stars say no, some will call it doomed. Others will press forward anyway, hearts battling constellations. But the stars aren't your only problem. There are birthmarks to consider, strange spots on the skin that could mean divine favor or a terrible curse. You might be soulmates, or destined to destroy each other. Superstition had no consistency. It only had conviction. Then there are the laws of blood. You cannot marry your cousin, or your cousin's cousin, or your fourth cousin twice removed, unless, of course, you can pay for a dispensation. The rich often could. With enough gold, even forbidden love could be declared technically permissible, by Rome if not by reason. Still, many couples lied. They erased branches from family trees. They claimed they were only distantly related, or not related at all, even if they shared a grandmother's nose and a grandfather's name. But even if your bloodlines were clear and your stars aligned, there was still status. You, a noble, fall in love with a peasant. Scandalous. It was more than inappropriate. It was almost unthinkable. The social gap wasn't just wide, it was bottomless. To love beneath your station was to risk your name, your future, and possibly your inheritance. And yet, people did. Some fell for stable boys and washerwomen. Some stared too long at the wrong person in the wrong hall. Some ran off. Others stayed and suffered and loved from a distance. Even ordinary people watched the signs. If you dropped bread at supper while thinking about someone, it was a bad omen. If a raven flew overhead while you daydreamed, forget it. That romance was cursed. Someone might bury charms beneath your doorstep to either bless your union or destroy it. Everyone had an opinion. The stars, the saints, the birds, the bones. And sometimes, the old woman in the woods, definitely not a witch, except she definitely was, would tell you your love was doomed unless you swallowed ash and rosemary on a full moon while wearing socks inside out. You might laugh, but deep down you wonder, what if she's right? Because in this world love wasn't just irrational, it was mystical, it defied rules, and yet it was surrounded by them. Still, people loved, clumsily, boldly, often against the advice of priests, parents, and planetary alignments. Because the heart, stubborn, reckless, hopeful, has never cared much for rules. You've heard of kings, mighty rulers with crowns of gold and endless scrolls of titles. You've heard of emperors who carved borders into the world with swords and ambition. But have you heard of the woman who took the head of Cyrus the Great and drowned it in blood? Her name was Tomiris. She was not born into marble halls or silk-wrapped palaces. Her throne was the open sky. Her court was the earth itself. She ruled not from behind walls, but from the saddle of a war horse. She led the Massageti, a confederation of nomadic tribes who roamed the vast grasslands of Central Asia. They were not soft people. They were horse archers, warriors, herders. They worshipped the sun. They did not wait for history to remember them, they rode into it screaming. Tomiris did not inherit power by accident. She rose through strength, through vision, through sheer, unrelenting presence. No husband guided her hand. No brother overshadowed her rule. She stood alone and she stood firm. At the edge of her world, trouble stirred. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great was expanding fast. He had taken Lydia. He had taken Babylon. And now his eyes turned east. He saw the steppes not as sovereign land, but as space waiting to be conquered. The nomads in his mind were wild grass to be trampled beneath the boots of civilization. So he made her an offer, a political marriage, a tempting one. He would wed Tomyris, combine their lands, forge unity through union. But Tomyris saw what he truly wanted, not alliance, absorption. She refused. Cyrus, enraged by the rejection, crossed the Araxes River with his army. He set a trap, left behind a rich, abandoned camp filled with food and wine, a baited hook gleaming with Persian pride. Tomyris's son, Spargapises, took the bait. He led his men into the camp, drank the wine, and was captured. When Tomyris learned of his capture, she sent a message, not as a plea but as a warning. "Release my son, leave our land, or I will give you your fill of blood." Cyrus did not listen. Spargapises, shamed and bound, took his own life. And with that, something in Tomyris broke. This was no longer a skirmish. It was war, personal, cosmic, unforgivable. She rallied her people. She summoned every rider, every archer, every tribe that would follow her. She didn't march like an empire, she moved like a storm, fluid, wild, fast. And when she found the Persians, she did not hesitate. The battle was brutal, one of the bloodiest the ancient world had seen. There were no speeches, no mercy, only blades, hooves, screams, and Tomyris at the center of it all. And when the dust settled, Cyrus was dead. But Tomyris wasn't done. She had his body dragged from the field. She ordered his head severed. She filled a wineskin with blood and placed it inside. And then, according to legend, she looked into the eyes of the dead king and whispered, "You thirsted for blood. Now drink your fill." Was every detail true? Herodotus wrote the tale, and he was known more for drama than accuracy. But even if half of it is myth, the truth is this. Cyrus, the unstoppable conqueror, met his end not at the hands of a rival king, but at the hands of a queen on horseback, blazing with grief and vengeance. And her name did not fade. It rode on the wind. The battlefield lies quiet now. Crows circle, blood seeps into the earth. The banners of Persia hang torn, soaked in dust and silence. And there at the center stands Tomyris. She is not triumphant. She is not smiling. She does not raise her arms or declare her glory. She simply stands, staring down at the body of Cyrus the Great, the man who could not be defeated, the man who took kingdoms as easily as he took breath, the man who thought he could charm her into surrender, now lifeless, headless, reduced. But for Tomyris this is not victory, not really. Her son is gone. Her heart is hollowed out by grief, her triumph carved with sorrow. She has avenged him, yes. But vengeance, like blood, stains everything it touches. It does not bring peace. It brings silence. She did not fight to expand her lands. She did not seek glory. She did not take Cyrus's crown or claim his cities. She left the empire to grieve its king while she returned to the windswept steppe, the only kingdom she ever wanted. No war tax, no coronation, no demand for tribute, because Tomyris never wanted power. She wanted sovereignty. She wanted freedom. She wanted her people left in peace. And in that she succeeded. Her victory sent tremors through the ancient world. In Babylon, in Egypt, in every corner of Persia's reach, rumors spread like wildfire. The great king was dead, not felled by a rival emperor, not slain in some holy war, but brought down by a queen with no palace, no coinage, no marble statues. A queen of dust and discipline, a queen of fury. But what happened next? That's the mystery. History offers no epilogue. No scrolls recount her final days. No monuments bear her likeness. No tomb carved in stone. She disappears into the fog of time like the breath of a horse in winter air, brief, hot, and vanishing. Some say that's fitting. Her power was never in permanence, it was in defiance. Her memory does not rest in statues. It gallops in legend. Scholars debate the details. Was Cyrus really killed by her army? Did she truly desecrate his body in blood? Or was this tale shaped by Greek imagination, eager to believe that even the mightiest Eastern ruler could be humbled? But what matters is this: someone stopped Cyrus. Someone dared to defy the unstoppable. And that someone was not a man with a sword, but a mother with a broken heart and a sharpened will. Tomyris never ruled from a throne. She ruled from the saddle. She never wore gold, she wore dust. She did not write history, but she bent it and it never forgot. Because in a world built by kings, it was a queen who ended one. Time moves on. The empire Cyrus built limps forward under other names, other rulers. Cities rise, fall, rise again. But in the windswept lands beyond the rivers, where the grass bends and no border holds, her name still whispers. Tomyris. She ruled not through bloodlines but through strength. She left behind no dynasty, no coins with her face, no scrolls declaring her glory, but she left something else, something heavier, a warning that no empire, no matter how mighty, can take what is not offered freely. That even the most invincible of men may fall, not to a rival army, but to a mother who dares to fight back. She has been painted, reimagined, reinterpreted through centuries. To Renaissance artists, she was savage justice, blood-stained and magnificent. To Enlightenment thinkers, she was a question. Can a woman wield power and still be noble? To modern historians, she is a ghost, half fact, half myth, wholly unforgettable. And still she is claimed. In Central Asia, she is a symbol of resistance, a warrior of the steppes, free and fearless. Statues rise in her honor. Her name is taught in classrooms. She lives again, not in palace halls, but in the minds of those still hungry for untamed power. She is a reminder that sometimes the greatest force in history is not ambition, it's loss. It's love sharpened into a blade. And when history forgets women like her, leaders, warriors, mothers who refuse to break, those stories don't die. They wait, carried not in stone but in wind, in silence, in the untold. Because when the wind howls across the steppe, some say it still carries her name. Tomyris, not gone, only riding farther ahead.